Hi, it's been a minute since I've posted. And I'm gonna pick up with my cancer story with my chemo treatments. March 12th, 2017 was my first chemo appointment, and I learned a bunch of stuff. Like, what is chemotherapy? And chemotherapy, well, I guess I need to start out with, you know, how the cancer cells grow and stuff like that. Healthy cells divide and grow in a very neat way. Cancer cells reproduce in an uncontrolled way, and if this goes unchecked, these cells start to outnumber healthy cells, and that's where we have problems. Chemotherapy interferes with with a cancer cell's ability to reproduce. It also targets the hormones and the stuff that the cancer cells feed on, and it can, in some cases, cause the cancer cells to kill themselves. And while chemotherapy can also kill healthy cells, you're trying to kill the cancer cells before they could reproduce, and a healthy cell can kind of fight that off a little better. Chemotherapy is used to shrink tumors before surgery and after surgery, or in remission to remove or prevent reoccurrence, which is what my case was, or to slow the progression and reduce symptoms in late stage cancers, which is where a lot of your metastatic cancers still undergo chemotherapy. Things that I've learned in the course of my chemo that I was unprepared for is that chemo takes hours. And what I learned on top of that is when you have complications, your hours become hours upon hours. My cancer center was set up into different pods of 6 to 8 chairs, and the number of pods that were open that day depended on the number of nurses scheduled. And again, in my center anyway, there was usually about 3 pods, usually at least 3 pods open, so about 24 chairs. Now, when you go to the doctor's office, things get bogged down, doctors slow down, and your 10 o'clock appointment becomes a 12 o'clock appointment sometimes, as I recently experienced at a doctor's office. This happens at chemo too. If somebody is the more your chairs are tied up with problem patients, the more people have to wait out in the lobby, and that happens quite a lot. I also learned, not from my surgeons, not from any of their nurses, not from the lab, but from my chemo nurse. So I talked to a lot of people before I made it to chemo, that I was what is called extremity restricted. So the cancer side, which was my right side, that they removed lymph nodes from, you're not supposed to have blood drawn. You're not supposed to have you're not supposed to have your blood pressure taken on that side, because they can cause a condition called lymphedema. Lymphedema is swelling in the extremity where you've had damage to the lymphatic system, where it causes a blockage, and it's extraordinarily painful and difficult to deal with. With my most recent injury, I was in physical therapy, and they had an entire division dedicated to lymphedema recovery. And while I'm on this tangent, another potential side effect that can kind of go along with the removal of the breasts and all that is cording, or axillary web syndrome. And basically, it's just scar tissue from your chest area that looks or feels very thick and rope-like. And this is something else that you would need physical therapy for. But none of these were the complications that I had with my chemo. And we didn't discover the complication I had until I was several treatments in. And those treatments took way longer than they should have. When you go into your chemo center, or at least when I went into my chemo center, you start with lab work so they can take your blood counts and see where you are as far as your white blood count, your red blood count. I found out that I have a weird type of anemia where your red blood cells are teeny tiny. It apparently affects Mediterranean people. So, yay for my Italian heritage. Didn't get the beautiful olive skin. I did get dark hair, but you could see the roots. But didn't get any of the, beautiful tanning in the sun or anything. But crazy blood diseases? Well, not really diseases, but, crazy blood stuff, that's what I get from my Italian relatives. Thanks. Anyway, apparently, by the way, that type of anemia is better treated with folic acid than iron, which is good because I hate iron pills. When I would finally make it back to a chemo chair, well, when they went to take my blood, they very often couldn't get a blood return from my port. In order to get chemotherapy, you have to have blood return from your portacath port. I don't know if you could see it. That is the scar right there left from the removal of my portacath port. That is the only scar you will see, because I don't think you all want to see my other mangled scars. And I don't think I could, given where they are, I don't think I could post those on YouTube. So the lab would have to flush a lot of saline through my port, and maybe sometimes they'd get blood return, but most of the time they gave up and just went through my veins. Then I would have to go to chemo, and they would let the chemo nurses deal with the port, because the chemo nurses could get heparin, and the lab had to get an act of God to give it, basically. And it would make the long wait even longer. So the thing with heparin, and what heparin does is it thins the, if you don't know, is it thins the blood, and it weakens any clots so they can flow through, and it just makes it easier to get blood return. The lab would give up trying to get a return from the portacath and just take my blood through the veins. That would leave the chemo nurses to use the heparin, which is the blood thinner, and it has to sit in the leads to the port for like 30 minutes before they know it would work. They would have to flush it out. Then they would have to try to get blood return. And it would take several saline flushes on top of that. After the 4 chemo treatments that were extremely damaging to the body, they're just super toxic, and they can't go through your veins. They sent me to radiology, who put in the port, to evaluate the port and find out why it wasn't working. And apparently, the end of the port had slipped against an artery, which is a bad thing, because, it's supposed to be in the vein, not in the artery. So the rest of my chemo had to be given through the slightly less toxic chemo was given through my veins, which did some damage to them. Chemotherapy is not just the chemotherapy drugs, though. It's a cocktail of drugs, basically, that are all infused at the same time. Generally, it's your chemo meds, a steroid, and an anti-nausea drug, or at least mine was, and they're run together with a bolus of saline. In other words, you're going to be peeing a lot. I did find that the Xanax that I was given for my stress level when all of this started was immensely helpful in dealing with the hyperactive feeling I got from the steroid. So I would take a 0.5 milligram before I went into chemo, which probably helped a lot with the aggravation of waiting too. And then the other half when I got out, or at least later that evening, so I could try to sleep. And of course, let me just put that out there now. This is just me sharing what worked for me, not me giving medical advice, because I am ill-equipped to do that. I am not a medical professional. I didn't really have any immediate side effects from any of this, except for some increased blood pressure, which I already had some increased blood pressure, but we found as chemo went on that it would take 2 or 3 times with both manual and electric blood pressure cuffs to get any kind of reading on me. And sometimes that didn't work either. And then with the first rounds of chemo, the much more toxic drug, I had some minor nausea and vomiting, which is to be expected. My husband, bless him, came to the first 2 treatments with me, kept me company. We both sat there and played on our phones. But at the time, he was an over-the-road truck driver, and then he got paid by the mile. And staying with me, he lost a lot of miles. It wasn't worth it financially for him to stay with me when we were literally sitting there and playing on our phones. So once we knew for sure that I wasn't going to be completely debilitated by treatment, unable to drive and stuff like that, because I didn't know what to expect, it was just better for him to go back to work. One of the things that I had going on at the time, or during that time, was, and you know, especially with the lowered white blood cell count, you're very susceptible to illness. So any temperature over 100.4, not 104, I had to call the doctor. Well, I woke up one day with my eye all swollen and gross and feeling like death, and I had like 102 fever, and it was time to call the doctor. So I got to go back to my cancer center for the second time that week. I was very fortunate that my treatments were only once a week. I will never take that for granted, because there are some people that have to live up there, and it sucks. I had more labs drawn, chest x-rays. I had, they took blood cultures, all kinds of stuff. And then I got a diagnosis from the nurse practitioner. I think it was a respiratory infection. I'm not sure. I don't remember. It was 3 years ago. And then the eye infection that I had to go to an ophthalmologist for. Between the nausea and vomiting, the normal chemo side effects, and being sick, I probably shouldn't have been driving. But my husband was at work. My family was working. Well, my family that helps me out with a lot of stuff was working. And my mom is my mom. This was, and the fact that I shouldn't have been driving was driven even more home by the fact that in my haste to get home because I felt like death, I got a speeding ticket. Made me very sad. So sad that I almost did the stereotypical I'm a girl and I'm gonna cry and try to get out of this ticket thing. But I didn't. I really wanted to. Of course, not the cute girl, so I probably couldn't have gotten out of the ticket, but I might have been able to play the cancer card, although I hadn't lost my hair yet at that point. Anyway, I didn't do any of that. I just went, paid the ticket. I had lost my hair by the time I went to pay the ticket, so I think they felt bad for me, but they still made me pay the ticket. With the second round of chemo drugs, which was Taxol and Paraplatin, not that that matters to you unless you've been on them, or you're going to be on them, I had much more pronounced side effects. Now, I was still lucky as far as side effects because I still had less side effects than a lot of other people, but they still sucked. They all suck. The nausea and vomiting I had was far more pronounced. It was more often. It was uncomfortable. It was me occasionally having to pull the car over to puke in the car. As a pro tip, carry extra small trash bags or untorn grocery bags. Please make sure they're untorn for the safety of your own clothes in your vehicle at all times. Also, when you have a 4-year-old, she's going to find this hysterical. I developed some neuropathy in my hands and feet. In my hands, I had already had carpal tunnel, so I already had braces. I thought this would be helpful because it just felt like the carpal tunnel in my hands had been increased to like 1,000,000. And I'd gone through something similar while I was pregnant. But the braces did not help. In my feet, I had just constant needles and pins. So it was unpleasant. But again, not as bad as some other people. It was bearable. If I'd pressed my doctors, I probably could have been put on gabapentin, which is a neuropathy drug. But I don't think I did. I don't remember being on it. One of the other really unpleasant things is that you get a gross metallic taste in your mouth. Like, you feel like you've been sucking on pennies, like, your whole life. It's... ugh. And it altered the flavor of almost everything. The second week of those chemo treatments was rough because that's where I lost my hair. Now, I'd already lost my breasts at that point, and losing my hair on top of it, even though I knew it was probably going to happen, it was rough. It was just, my treatments were on Mondays or Tuesdays usually. And I want to say by Wednesday or Thursday, my scalp had started to hurt. It was super tender. It was probably, I can't say the most unpleasant experience I've had because I've had a lot of painful, unpleasant experiences, but it was pretty bad. And my hair, by Friday, my hair was coming out in clumps. On Saturday, when my husband got home from work, I completely just was tired of all of it. Didn't want to deal with it anymore. But we didn't have any hair clippers, so I took his beard trimmer to my head. Let me tell you, shaving your head with a beard trimmer, really, really slow. Like, unpleasantly slow. I would need to not make that face anymore. Of course, I took pictures throughout the process. I posted them on my Instagram and Facebook and put funny captions on them. Because to me, I was finally able to take back some control over what was going on with me. I couldn't control losing my hair, but how I lost my hair and how quickly I lost my hair, that I could control. And I did. I learned a lot. I was not prepared. I mean, I know they say you lose so much heat through your head and all that, but I wasn't prepared for how much your hair kept your head warm, which I know sounds really stupid, and it's not something you think about until you have no hair. Because it was spring and summer while this happened, and even in the house, close to a fan, near a fan, air conditioner, anything in the house, I had to wear a hat almost all the time, or at least frequently. So, in order to make this more entertaining for my child, and because kids' hats are what we had available at the time, she had a Hello Kitty hat that she was not wearing. So I stretched that sucker to fit my bald head. She still has it. But I stretched it to fit my head, and that's what I wore in the house when I was cold. And she was highly amused. And that's really what was important to me, was trying to make this easy and fun. I guess fun's the wrong word, but just easily digestible for her. I also didn't realize, and again, this is going to sound incredibly stupid, your hair absorbs a crap ton of sweat. Because I would find myself just pouring down with sweat when I was hot. And of course, being in the position of having personal summers by that point, being hot happened a lot. I need to thank Jen Gerard for that phrase, personal summers, because I have used that quite often since I heard it. I was presented with the option to look for a wig, having not really knowing a lot about wigs outside of Halloween wigs. I didn't go with the wig thing because I thought it would be too much. It would be too uncomfortable. They'd be too hard to keep up with, to manage. You know, I knew for a good wig you had to take care of it. And I just figured it would be too much to deal with. So I started with like bandanas and baseball hats and stuff like that. For fancy occasions, I had a couple of nice scarves. That was fun. But by the middle of the summer, I gave up on covering my head altogether because bandanas are hot. Scarves are hot. Baseball hats are hot. It's the South. Everything is hot. However, I was very sun sensitive. Now, as you can see, I am pretty pasty as it is. But any amount of sun, I would get very red and it could damage my skin. So I carried sunscreen with me everywhere. And I would sunscreen everything, including my head, because I can't imagine. That sunburn on my head would have been miserable. I learned a lot about people while I had no hair, and while it was growing back, because I didn't wear anything. When you're bald and you're female, a bald male, nobody thinks about that. But when you're bald and female, and especially, well, I can't say especially, any bald female, I think people look at. And I had several occasions where people stared and they whispered, and they some of them seemed hostile and some of them didn't. And I'm sure some of that is projecting, but I also had times where strangers would come up to me and they would share their stories of survival and hope, and just, or people who just wanted to give me love as a total stranger because they recognized the haircut, as they say. Um, and I still, you know, it's a very, it's a it's a very weird place to be in, especially when you're incredibly introverted and you don't talk to people very often, if you can help it. Um, July 24th, I got to ring the bell, which signifies the end of chemo. And that was a huge thing because, I mean, I finished another chapter of my life, and I would love to say that things got better from there. You know, we we reached the end of this hurdle and everything was all better. But if you've learned anything from my last couple of videos, it didn't get better. But I'll save that story for next time. Gotta keep you wanting more.